The room is quiet, and you've just pressed play. Imagine tomorrow your name trending worldwide for all the wrong reasons. That's exactly what Lady Jane Grey faced in 1553. A teenager catapulted into a position of power she never asked for and crushed by a political machine sharper than any blade. Think you could stomach medieval justice? Spoiler, most modern people would faint before the real show even starts. So, before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. As the room softens around you, lean back and allow this story to unfold, an experience unlike anything you've listened to until now. History loves a clean headline, 9 Days Queen, but the messy truth lies underneath, a tale of family ambition, betrayal, and the brutal machinery of Tudor politics. And like every dark bedtime story, it begins not with glory, but with a child caught in the grip of other people's schemes. She is born in 1537, the same year King Henry VIII finally welcomes his long-awaited son, Edward. Jane Grey's life starts with bad timing, overshadowed by a dynasty obsessed with heirs and legitimacy. Her parents, the Duke and Duchess of Suffolk, are ambitious, sharp-elbowed nobles. They see in their daughter not a child, but a chess piece. And in a kingdom where women are usually married off for alliances, Jane is groomed for something rarer: power. Picture her education, not the half-hearted embroidery lessons given to most noble girls, but the hard grind of Latin, Greek, theology, philosophy. She reads Plato before most of us could spell it, and is writing letters in fluent classical languages as a tween. In modern terms, imagine being forced to master 3 dead languages before you even got a driver's license. Historians still argue whether Jane was a prodigy or just a very well-trained pawn. But either way, the result was the same: an intellect too sharp for the dull politics around her. And politics, like a silent predator, circles closer every year. Her tutor, Roger Ascham, leaves us a vivid tidbit. Jane confesses that when her parents drag her to hunt or dance, she hates it, preferring books in solitude. That sounds sweet, but in Tudor England, being more bookish than biddable is practically a death sentence. Meanwhile, the crown itself becomes unstable. Edward VI, the boy king, grows up sickly. Every cough echoes louder than any sermon in church. His declining health triggers a frenzy of plotting. Because if Edward dies childless, and everyone can see he will, the throne legally falls to his half-sisters Mary or Elizabeth. Mary, a Catholic, terrifies the Protestant faction who dominate Edward's court. So what do desperate power brokers do? They reach for someone malleable. Enter Jane. She is related to the Tudors through her grandmother, Henry VIII's younger sister. Not the strongest claim, but strong enough for manipulators like John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. Dudley is the kind of politician who could probably sell ice to Eskimos, then tax them for it. He pushes his own son, Guildford Dudley, into Jane's life. Cue a marriage that Jane does not want, does not enjoy, and cannot escape. Quirky tidbit: records suggest Jane didn't even like Guildford. In fact, she once threw a tantrum about sharing a bedroom with him. Hardly the power couple vibe. But none of that matters. Edward dies in July 1553, aged 15, and leaves a last-minute will excluding both Mary and Elizabeth. Instead, the throne is left to Jane, a teenage girl dragged literally kicking and screaming into the Tower of London, dressed in royal robes she never asked for. Think of it, TikTok teens today complain about bad Wi-Fi. Jane Grey is being shoved onto a throne that will likely get her killed. She sits there anyway, trembling. Outside, the people of England hardly notice. Most citizens don't even know who she is. No parades, no fireworks, no viral coronation moment. Just a confused kingdom and a teenage queen who looks more prisoner than monarch. And hovering over all of it, the shadow of Mary Tudor, who refuses to step aside quietly. The first 9 days are quiet, yes, but they are also a countdown. And as Jane gazes at the crown placed on her head, the thought unspoken in every corner of the tower is the same. How long until that crown rolls into the dirt? The crown sits on her head and feels like a prank gift no one wants to admit is real. Attendants shuffle parchments, seals crack into hot wax, and yet the Tower of London feels more like a waiting room than a palace. On day 1, counselors insist the realm is secure, that proclamations will summon loyalty. By day 2, those proclamations echo across London with all the force of a half-broken bell. The streets don't shout, "God save the Queen." They mutter, "Mary." and that's a rhythm no royal drummer can silence. John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, paces like a gambler who knows the dice are rigged. He has staked everything on Jane, his son, his reputation, even the legitimacy of Edward VI's dying device for the succession. Historians still argue whether the boy king's will was his own last gasp of Protestant zeal or Dudley's power grab dressed in piety. Either way, the document works like a bad terms of service agreement, long, technical, and unenforceable once people decide they don't care. The fact remains, Jane will be remembered as the 9 days queen, and 9 days is generous. Inside the tower, Jane tries to behave like a monarch. She signs orders with careful handwriting, receives dignitaries who can't stop staring at how young she looks, and fills empty hours with prayer and Greek texts. Guildford Dudley, her sulking husband, expects a fast-track promotion to king. Jane icily refuses, insisting that queenship is hers alone. Quirky tidbit, she even keeps the crown jewels locked up when Guildford's mother starts fishing for a joint coronation. Tudor drama meets the early modern version of changing the Netflix password. Meanwhile, Mary Tudor doesn't just gather supporters, she hoovers them up. In East Anglia, nobles declare for her, market towns cheer, and priests suddenly rediscover their Catholic loyalties. Mary has one advantage Jane can't touch. She's the daughter of Henry VIII. You can't crowdsource bloodlines. Jane's proclamations calling Mary illegitimate sound like spam emails everyone deletes without reading. Joke number 1. Jane's PR department might as well be 3 guys with a handbell shouting legal jargon. By day 3, Dudley rides out with troops to cut Mary off, leaving Jane in the tower surrounded by counselors who act like cats, ordered to babysit a dog. Their loyalty is negotiable. Jane notices. Her tutors taught her to parse Latin verbs. Now she's parsing the silence of men plotting escape routes. Day 4 passes in sermons and strategy. Jane doubles down on her Protestant faith, refusing to soften her stance even as advisors hint she should. She is stubborn, principled, and utterly out of step with survival politics. The mainstream fact is obvious. England is wobbling between Protestant reform and Catholic restoration. Jane chooses not to bend. Integrity is noble in saints and lethal in sovereigns. Day 5 brings rumors sprinting faster than messengers. Mary has 300 men. No, 3,000. She has cannons. No, she just has banners. What she absolutely has is momentum. Fringe tidbit of the day. A street astrologer in London allegedly sells charms, predicting which queen will win. Tudor entrepreneurship at its finest. Dudley begs for reinforcements. The council grows visibly anxious. Jane, book clutched to her side, continues to walk the tower like a scholar in borrowed robes. She cracks a dry joke that if politics could be conjugated like Latin verbs, order would appear instantly. Joke number 2, it lands about as well as the proclamations. By day 6, Dudley's letters sound like SOS signals. His troops are thin, loyalty thinner. The council sniffs the wind and begins to pivot. Jane sees it. She keeps her back straight, her voice calm, her decisions firm. She still refuses to make Guildford king, and that refusal will become a line quoted in later ballads, proof of her strength or her fatal rigidity. Day 7, London's mood changes. Merchants delay shipments. Priests quietly draft sermons praising Mary just in case. Even the tower's ravens seem louder, as if mocking the collapsing experiment inside. Counselors hold sessions that end with nothing decided, which is itself a decision. Jane still signs papers, still prays, still dreams of libraries. Joke number 3, even the birds seem to know Mary's about to win. Day 8, the cracks widen. News arrives that Mary's support has swelled, that nobles who promised neutrality have now declared for her. The council studies the letter like it's a mirror no one wants to look into. A man coughs, another suggests negotiating. Everyone hears the word surrender. Jane simply says she trusts God's will. It's her way of dismissing their cowardice without raising her voice. Day 9 is the verdict. The council sneaks out of the tower, declares Mary queen at Baynard's castle, and suddenly London erupts. Bells ring, banners wave, and the people roar for Mary Tudor. Dudley himself throws up his cap and shouts, "God save Queen Mary," as if Olympic-level hypocrisy might buy him forgiveness. It doesn't. Back in the tower, Jane is stripped of her title with as much ceremony as deleting a file. Guards exchange knowing glances. counselors dispatch groveling apologies to Mary. Jane asks for her books and her chaplain. She whispers a question about her parents. Historians still argue whether Jane ever believed she was truly queen, or whether she knew she was a placeholder from the beginning. Her straightened spine in that moment suggests she knew exactly what she had been: useful, disposable, and now expendable. The cheers for Mary drift across the city, faint echoes in Jane's chamber. A guard clears his throat. Another sets down a tray. The door swings wider, and the girl who was queen for 9 days sees the corridor stretch before her, not toward power, but toward a prison she never rehearsed. The throne is gone, the proclamations withdrawn, and the Tower of London that once crowned Jane now keeps her locked within its stone ribs. The irony is thick. She ruled the kingdom from inside these walls, and now the same walls cage her. Guards shuffle past her chamber door, glancing in at the pale teenager who is no longer Your Majesty, but a state prisoner whose life dangles on the edge of Mary Tudor's temper. Jane accepts it with a calm that unnerves her captors. She asks for her Greek texts, for her prayer book, for her tutor's letters. She fills the silence with ink and parchment, as if Latin conjugations could anchor her to something beyond politics. Visitors note her serenity, which is either saintly or terrifying, depending on your view of Tudor justice. Historians still argue whether her composure was a mask for terror or the natural result of years of religious discipline. Her parents, the Duke and Duchess of Suffolk, fare worse. They beg Mary for mercy, insisting Jane was a puppet, dragged unwillingly into Dudley's schemes. Mary listens, nods, and locks Jane up anyway. The new queen cannot risk looking soft. Every rebel, every preacher, every foreign diplomat watches her handling of Jane as a test. And so, Jane becomes a symbol, a bargaining chip, and an example waiting to be made. Guildford Dudley, Jane's sulky husband, is imprisoned too. In the Tower, husband and wife are close enough to know of each other's confinement, but not allowed to meet. Letters suggest Jane had little love for him, yet in those months of waiting, he becomes her mirror. Another teenager caught in the gears of ambition. Quirky tidbit: reports claim Guildford begged to see Jane before their executions, but she refused, perhaps out of cold strength, perhaps because her mind was already fixed on God alone. Outside the Tower, England swirls. Mary is cheered by crowds in London, but beneath the surface, Protestant nobles fume. Continental ambassadors whisper about Mary's next move: marriage. The name whispered is Philip of Spain, a Catholic prince who makes Protestant stomachs churn. If Mary weds him, they fear England will become a Spanish province. It's a fear so strong it sparks rebellion. Wyatt's rebellion in 1554, and Jane, locked away, becomes both irrelevant and dangerous. Irrelevant because she has no power, dangerous because her very existence gives rebels a Protestant figurehead. When the rebellion breaks, Jane's father, the Duke of Suffolk, joins it. This single act slams her coffin shut. Mary might have spared Jane as a pawn kept in reserve, but with her father openly rebelling, mercy is now politically suicidal. Joke number 1, if there were a Tudor family award for Worst Dad, Suffolk would be a finalist. Jane knows the stakes. She turns more intensely to her faith, writing letters that read like sermons. One of her most famous is to her younger sister Catherine, urging her to cling to Protestant truth and ignore the painted pleasures of the world. She writes with the voice of someone twice her age, her words echoing across centuries. Scholars debate whether Jane truly believed every line, or whether she wrote for posterity, already aware she was crafting her own martyrdom. The Tower itself becomes a strange stage. Jane walks in its gardens under guard, sometimes glimpsed by others who marvel at her composure. She debates with priests sent to convert her back to Catholicism, and she never yields. This isn't a silent prisoner awaiting death. This is a teenager correcting theologians with calm logic. Joke number 2. Imagine a 15-year-old today out-arguing a professional bishop. TikTok would eat it up. Yet for all her intellectual fireworks, Jane remains a child in danger. Reports mention her thin frame, her quiet voice, her refusal of luxuries. Even Mary notices. The queen delays her execution, wavering, reluctant to kill her young cousin, but politics tightens its grip. With rebellion still smoldering, Mary must make an example. Jane's existence, even in a locked room, is now too great a risk. The sentence is passed. Treason. Jane will die. The date is set for February 12, 1554. News trickles into her chamber, and she accepts it with eerie composure. She writes her final prayers, leaving inscriptions in her prayer book. Simple, direct words of faith that still survive. Quirky tidbit, that very prayer book, once stained with her tears, eventually found its way into the British Museum, where tourists now gawk at her handwriting as if grief can be encased in glass. On the night before her death, Jane is offered one last chance to convert. A Catholic priest presses her, urging her to seek salvation through Rome. She declines, gently but firmly. "I ground my faith upon God's word," she says, according to witnesses. Historians still argue whether these words are verbatim or embellished, but they ring with the clarity of someone who has chosen her end. In the early morning hours, she writes a farewell to her father, who sits in another tower cell awaiting his own execution. Her words are heavy with forgiveness, though he is partly responsible for her doom. Joke number 3. Jane's letter proves she was far more mature than the man who was supposed to protect her. The night drains away, replaced by the chill of dawn. Outside, carpenters hammer the scaffold into place. Inside, Jane folds her hands, her lips moving in silent prayer. She has hours left to live, and she spends them not in panic, but in steady preparation. Guards shuffle nervously, as if aware they are witnessing something that will be remembered long after their names are forgotten. The tower is quiet, but under its stones, history waits. The girl who once wore a crown now ties her hair back, preparing to face the axe. And when the door finally opens, the sound is not just wood creaking, it is the sound of history dragging her into its most merciless chapter. The morning air in the Tower of London is sharp, carrying the faint smell of damp stone and freshly cut timber. Outside Jane's chamber, workmen have already finished hammering together the scaffold. The sound lingers in the minds of everyone within earshot, like a ticking clock counting down to an ending no one can delay. Jane rises early. She dresses in plain clothing, dark and modest, refusing any display that might look like royalty. Her attendants weep quietly, but Jane herself keeps her composure. At barely 17 years old, she prepares to walk out to her death with the steadiness of a veteran soldier. Guards are unnerved. They've seen grown men dragged crying to the block. Here is a teenager folding her handkerchief neatly, as if organizing a desk. Before she is let out, Jane receives a final visit from Dr. John Feckenham, the Catholic priest sent by Queen Mary to persuade her one last time. He pleads with her to save her soul by embracing Catholic doctrine. Jane listens politely, even debates him, but her answers remain firm. "I ground my faith upon God's word," she repeats. It is both confession and defiance. Historians still argue whether her calm was faith-driven courage or simply numb resignation. Either way, she refuses to bend. Guildford Dudley, her husband, has his execution scheduled first. He is taken to Tower Hill, beyond the walls where crowds gather to watch. Jane, from her chamber, cannot see the block, but hears the rumble of the people, the muffled roar that rises when an axe falls. A servant glimpses her face. She turns pale but steady, murmuring prayers under her breath. Quirky tidbit, Guildford's body is carried back in a cart past her window, his head wrapped in cloth. Jane glances once, then bows her head, as if she already knew the sight would come. When her own time arrives, the procession forms. Guards open the heavy wooden door, and Jane steps into the corridor. The tower seems both larger and smaller, every stone pressing in with history. She walks slowly with dignity, refusing the arm of a guard. A few witnesses later record how she carried a small prayer book, thumbing its pages as she moved. Joke number 1, most teenagers can't walk across a room without looking at their phone. Jane manages it while rehearsing her last words. The scaffold stands in the Tower Green, not Tower Hill. This is a private execution, more contained, fewer eyes. Still, officials, soldiers, and a selected audience gather, their breath clouding in the February cold. Jane mounts the steps. The platform creaks beneath her weight, a sound that makes even hardened soldiers shift uneasily. At the center lies the block, draped in black cloth. The executioner waits, axe in hand, his face half hidden. Jane turns to the crowd and delivers her speech. She admits she was wrongly declared queen, that she never sought power, and that she accepts her punishment for treason. Yet she insists her soul is innocent before God, clinging to her Protestant faith. Her words are calm, deliberate, rehearsed like lines in a play she never auditioned for. She hands her gloves and prayer book to her attendants. She loosens her hair, tucks it under a cap, and then turns toward the block. For a moment, hesitation flickers. She cannot see the block clearly. Blindfolded, she gropes with her hands, searching. Panic rises in her voice. "What shall I do? Where is it?" The crowd murmurs, and for the first time, her composure cracks. A guard guides her hands, placing them on the rough wood. She lowers herself, stretches her body forward, and lays her neck upon it. The silence is absolute. The executioner kneels, asking her forgiveness as custom dictates. Jane answers softly, "I pray you dispatch me quickly." Joke number 2. Only in Tudor England would someone have to politely tell a man with an axe to hurry up. The blade lifts. Witnesses later say Jane's lips move in prayer even as she waits. Then, in a single stroke, the axe falls. The sound echoes against the tower's walls, brutal and final. A gasp breaks from the audience, followed by silence. Jane Grey is gone, her head displayed briefly as proof of justice delivered. Her attendants gather her body tenderly, wrapping it in cloth. They place it in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where so many Tudor victims lie stacked beneath the stones. No tomb, no monument, just a slab over the girl who once held a crown. And yet the legend begins instantly. Those who saw her die speak of her courage, her learning, her calm defiance. Some call her a Protestant martyr, others a tragic pawn. Historians still argue whether she deserves sainthood or sympathy, whether she chose dignity or had no choice at all. The tower settles back into silence, but her story does not. In taverns, in churches, in whispered gossip across England, Jane's name spreads. She ruled 9 days, yet her death leaves more echo than many long-reigning monarchs. Joke number 3. Most rulers hope to be remembered for accomplishments. Jane is remembered because she lost faster than anyone else. The scaffold is dismantled, the black cloth is folded away. Life in the tower resumes, but the shadow of a young queen's blood lingers, darkening its stones. And as night falls, those who witnessed her end cannot shake the image of a teenager blindfolded, whispering prayers, and asking quietly where the block was. The sound of the axe still hangs in the air. The axe has fallen, the crowd has gasped, and Lady Jane Grey, England's 9 days queen, is gone. Yet in death, her story begins to swell beyond anything her short life could contain. For the people who shuffle away from Tower Green that cold February day, the image of a teenage girl whispering prayers before the blade is too haunting to forget. Some call it justice, some call it tragedy, but everyone knows they have witnessed a moment destined to echo through time. Mary Tudor, now secure on the throne, breathes easier for the moment. Executing Jane was a political necessity, or at least Mary convinces herself so. The rebellion sparked by Jane's father and the Protestant nobles had made leniency impossible. A living Jane was a permanent invitation to conspiracy. Still, Mary hesitates to celebrate. It is one thing to sign a death warrant. It is another to feel the ripples of a girl's blood in the public conscience. Historians still argue whether Mary regretted the execution or considered it simply one grim act among many in her reign. Either way, Jane's death will haunt Mary's reputation almost as much as her later persecutions. Inside the tower, silence settles like dust. The scaffold is gone, dismantled within hours, its timbers reused elsewhere as though to erase the memory. But memories never vanish so easily. Guards mutter about Jane's composure. Attendants recall her words, her trembling search for the block, and within the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where her body rests beside Guildford's, a new legend begins to take root, that of the innocent martyr, the girl who faced death with unshakable faith. Across London, stories sprout faster than weeds. Some say Jane's final prayer book, smudged with her last notes, glows with divine authority. Others claim angels wept at her execution. Quirky tidbit, later folklore even insists the tower green grass never grew properly where her blood spilled, as if the earth itself remembered. This is how myths form, not from facts, but from the need to explain what should never have been allowed to happen. Meanwhile, Jane's family crumbles. Her father, the Duke of Suffolk, is executed not long after, paying with his life for his rebellion. Her mother, Frances Grey, shockingly remarries within months, choosing survival over mourning. Historians squabble over whether this made her coldly pragmatic or just a woman who understood the ruthless world she lived in. Catherine Grey, Jane's younger sister, inherits the dangerous shadow of her bloodline and will later be imprisoned herself for marrying without permission. The Grey family, once ambitious climbers, become a cautionary tale of Tudor ambition turned toxic. In Europe, Jane's death is treated as theater. Catholic commentators gloat over the fall of a Protestant usurper. Protestant writers elevate her into a saint. Pamphlets, letters, and chronicles spread her story. To the reformers, she is no longer a failed queen. She is the innocent victim, killed for her true faith. Jane becomes a Protestant Joan of Arc, a figurehead whose learning and purity shine brighter because they were extinguished so young. And in truth, her writings add fuel to this fire. The letters she penned in prison, the marginalia in her prayer book, and her farewell speeches become texts of devotion. They are copied, reprinted, and circulated for decades, especially when Mary Tudor's reign devolves into what Protestants call the Marian persecutions. Hundreds are burned at the stake in Mary's attempt to restore Catholicism. Against that backdrop, Jane's story gleams all the more brightly. The quiet scholar who died with courage, a Protestant light snuffed out before the flames spread. But was Jane truly a martyr? Historians still argue whether she died for faith or simply for politics. The fact remains, Mary could not allow her to live. Jane's execution was less about her theology and more about erasing a rival claimant. And yet, perception is often stronger than truth. To Protestants of later centuries, Jane Grey symbolized the nobility of their cause. Her image appeared in paintings, her words in sermons, her story in children's books that painted her as a paragon of virtue. Take the 1560s, for instance. Just a decade after her death, the Protestant regime of Elizabeth I encourages Jane's legend. Chroniclers emphasize her learning, her obedience to God, her gentle endurance. Quirky tidbit: Elizabeth herself, though not directly celebrating Jane, tolerated the myth as it undermined her Catholic half-sister Mary's legacy. In some ways, Jane Grey becomes a convenient ghost for the Protestant state, silent, pure, and politically useful. Fast forward a century, and the myth only grows. By the time of the Victorians, Jane is depicted in lush oil paintings, standing like marble before her death. Artists paint her pale, ethereal, glowing in white robes as if purity itself incarnate. Never mind that eyewitness accounts describe her trembling and blindfolded, groping for the block. The Victorians prefer the sanitized, saintly version, a soft martyrdom fit for moral lessons. Joke number 1, leave it to the Victorians to turn even a beheading into a tasteful family parlor painting. Yet in the quiet spaces of scholarship, the harder truths remain. Jane was ambitious parents' daughter, pawn of John Dudley, victim of dynastic roulette. She was forced onto the throne against her will, a teenager trapped in a game she could never win. She never ruled, never commanded an army, never issued more than a few proclamations. And still, her death resonates more than the long reigns of monarchs who outlived her. Sometimes brevity creates legacy more than endurance. And what of the debates? Was Jane a reluctant victim dragged to her fate, or a willing martyr who embraced her role as Protestant heroine? Was she the innocent girl coerced into marriage and queenship, or a sharp-minded intellectual who accepted the responsibilities of the crown more eagerly than we like to admit? Historians still argue whether her letters were authentic expressions of faith or carefully constructed propaganda to secure her place in memory. What is undeniable is the cultural afterlife she achieved. In plays, poems, novels, and paintings, Jane Grey becomes more than human. She becomes symbol. The girl who refused her husband's coronation, who debated priests with the poise of a scholar, who went to the block whispering prayers, is transformed into an icon of lost innocence. Even her nickname, the 9 Days Queen, is poetic, a headline too neat to resist. Joke number 2. It's like history's cruel version of clickbait, short, tragic, unforgettable. For centuries, writers returned to her as a muse. In the Romantic era, she is the tender lamb among wolves. In the Victorian period, she is the model of feminine virtue. In the 20th century, she is re-examined as a tragic political pawn, her intellect praised, but her agency questioned. And in the 21st, she becomes a symbol once again, this time of youth crushed by power, a reminder of how fragile lives can be when caught in the crosshairs of ambition. The tower itself carries her memory. Tourists stand on Tower Green where she died, gazing at the plaque that marks the spot. Guides whisper her story with the reverence of ghost tales, pointing to the chapel where her body rests. Some visitors claim to feel a chill, as though Jane's presence lingers. Quirky tidbit: There are even reported ghost sightings of a pale girl in Tudor dress drifting near the chapel, though skeptics say the only spirits in the tower come from the gift shop's whiskey bottles. And yet, Jane doesn't need ghost stories to haunt us. The facts alone are chilling enough. A teenager, educated beyond her years, crowned without her consent, stripped of her throne within days, executed before her life truly began. What makes her story endure isn't supernatural. It's the stark collision of innocence and brutality, learning and violence, principle and power. The world remembers her, not for what she achieved, but for how she faced her end. Jane Grey had no army, no coronation, no sweeping policies. What she had was her faith, her words, and her refusal to collapse under the weight of death. That paradoxically became her legacy. Joke number 3. In a century where monarchs were measured by the heads they cut off, Jane stands out because it was her head on the block. And so, her story softens into myth. Parents tell children about the innocent queen who died bravely. Preachers cite her as an example of faith under fire. Historians argue artists embellish, and tourists shuffle over the stones where she fell. Yet beneath all that, one fact remains painfully simple. Jane Grey was 17. And she died because others wanted power. The Tower Green lies quiet today, the grass neatly trimmed, the plaque discreet. Visitors walk past, some barely noticing, others pausing to whisper. The chapel bells still ring, as they did centuries ago, and within their sound, one can almost imagine the echo of a soft teenage voice saying, "I pray you dispatch me quickly." Her story doesn't close with her death. It lingers, asking uncomfortable questions. How much agency did she truly have? How many choices were hers? And how many imposed upon her by men in council chambers and parents at dinner tables? Was she, in the end, queen, martyr, or merely victim? The answers remain blurred, but perhaps that is why she endures. History loves its certainties, yet Jane Grey survives as ambiguity incarnate, young yet wise, queen yet prisoner, pawn yet legend. And as the centuries fold over her memory, she becomes not less, but more. More symbol, more myth, more mirror for every age to project its own values upon. Perhaps that is her truest crown, not one of gold, but of memory. Now let the story soften. The axe is gone, the crowds dispersed, the tower quiet. Picture the cold stones warming under the faint light of a winter afternoon, the air still holding echoes that only the imagination can hear. Jane's figure, so slight and fragile, begins to fade into the mist of history, leaving behind not terror, but reflection. Her voice, once filled with the sharpness of scripture and the tremble of youth, drifts away like a lullaby carried by the wind. The clatter of chains, the murmur of prayers, the gasp of the crowd, all of it dissolves into silence. Only the quiet remains, a space where her story lingers but no longer cuts. Rest now in that space. Breathe slowly. Let the sharpness of her tragedy melt into a softer understanding that even in the darkest moments, there is courage. Even in the face of cruelty, there can be dignity. Jane's short life and sudden end are not meant to leave you shaken, but hushed, thoughtful, and calm. Close your eyes. Imagine the tower stones cool beneath your fingertips, the faint toll of a chapel bell, the last whisper of a prayer meant not for politics, but for peace. Let it carry you slowly into rest. And as you drift, know this: her story is over, but another waits, already whispering from history's long corridors. Next time, we will walk with another shadow, another voice, another tale meant to soften the edges of the night.